I've seen thousands of rage slop farming content grifters calling it Concord 2. I've seen battle dads calling it the best game they've played in decades. I've seen Destiny 2 fans praying for its downfall, but I do kind of actually understand where their grievances are coming from with Bungie. I've seen Redditors on r/OKBuddyRunners posting not safe for work images of every runner at a rate that would give the Deadlock community a run for its money. But I've never seen anybody complaining about the sound design. Gee, I wonder why that is. Yeah. Woke this, burnt peanut that, Arc Raiders, Tarkov, SteamDB, player count, Boyd, Yuri, whatever, man. I knew that no matter what happened with Marathon at release, that Bungie was going to absolutely cook with the sound design, and I was so right. This is one of the best sounding games ever released, period. This is a video about studying and learning about the audio of Marathon, but just give me one moment to talk about the release and the context surrounding it and why that's important to us from an audio perspective. Escape from Tarkov defined the benchmark for the extraction shooter genre almost 10 years ago, and since then, live service games have become the holy grail of the industry because if they work out, companies basically just get to print money. The problem is that they require a sizable and stable player base to function at all, and they often either fail immediately on release or suffer slow death spirals over time. This means that making a live service game in the niche and hardcore genre of extraction shooters wasn't really the first choice for many companies, except for Crytek with Hunt Showdown apparently. Great game, go watch my video on it. As we entered the 20s, the stage was set for extraction shooters to gain popularity. Survival games and battle royales had been dominating the casual player base outside of esports, and Escape from Tarkov just exploded on Twitch, going from like 10k players to hitting over 200,000. That event showed gaming executives who all had live service games on their brains that extraction shooters had potential, and so 3 to 5 years later, we saw dozens of them release. None of them really tried to match how hardcore Escape from Tarkov was, and most of them actually went in the opposite direction of trying to provide a more casual and less punishing experience by rounding off the emotional highs and lows and not requiring massive time investments to experience the core gameplay loop. This trend of softening the edges of the genre reached its climax with the release of Arc Raiders in late 2025, an extraction shooter made for casual, employed gamers that immediately gained millions of players. And with such a casual softcore extraction shooter being one of the most popular games out at the time, Marathon's release was especially high risk because it's one of the most hardcore games a AAA studio has ever released. Like sure, the systems for guns and consumables are simple, and the gear floor is pretty high, but the game is tense and it's punishing, and it's frustrating and exciting in ways that I can't ever remember feeling in a AAA game, and in many moments it genuinely made me feel the way that Hunt and Tarkov do. So Marathon is creating this unique opportunity where we're getting not only a hardcore AAA extraction shooter, which is a genre that relies heavily on audio for the experience that it provides, but we're also getting that set in a hard sci-fi setting with some of the best sound designers in the industry on the audio team. So what does that end up sounding like?
down.
He's right in the middle. Yep.
There might have been another team behind us.
In my opinion, it sounds extremely cool. So let's try and figure out what's going on. Marathon is not a stylized game. It's a realistic game, and it upholds physically grounded, hard sci-fi lore that's older than most of the player base. Stylized games prioritize artistic expression over physical accuracy in order to enhance the emotional experience of the game, no matter how unrealistic it looks. Realistic games enforce physical accuracy as a foundational constraint, allowing artistic expression to exist in the game world through industrial design, fashion, architecture, visual art, etc., etc., etc. So, it's easy to understand why people often speak about Marathon as if it's a stylized game. It's a realistic representation of a futuristic but physically grounded world filled with objects and phenomena that push the boundaries of the shapes, colors, and proportions that we're familiar with. The shapes of important and complex objects being simple and blocky isn't because the game has a low-poly art style. It's because in the game world they're made using advanced 3D printing technology. It's realistic because if you're 12 light years away from Earth, it's much easier to 3D print stuff on demand than it is to develop and maintain an interstellar logistics operation across a bazillion kilometers of empty space just so that lab scientist number 23 can get a new office chair. The bright colors of all the buildings aren't stylized and cartoonish and meant to be fun and vibrant. They're designed to be machine-readable environments. The artificial intelligences that designed and managed the failed colonization effort didn't care about human comfort or aesthetics. Marathon is a hard sci-fi franchise. So even though the new game pushes a lot of boundaries for us today and looks unlike anything we've ever seen, all of the lore and the visuals and everything still needed to be grounded in realism. And so why I'm making this video is because as a sound designer, I want to understand how the audio team managed to design and implement sounds that contribute so massively to creating the physically realistic and immersive experience that Marathon requires as both a new entry into a beloved hard sci-fi franchise and as an extraction shooter. Considering that the game takes place 800 years in the future with tons of advanced technology, most guns in the game sound like they could exist today. I believe it was a deliberate choice to keep them as some of the least advanced sounds in the game because, similar to the footsteps which we're going to go over, they're probably one of the sounds that you're going to hear the most. To keep the gun sounds feeling grounded, the audio team didn't use tons of tonal and very obviously synthesized source, which can quickly make weapons sound disconnected from what we recognize as a weapon sound. We can hear a direct example of what going in a more stylized direction would have sounded like by listening to some of the gun sounds from Bungie's previous game, Destiny 2. So clearly having Marathon's gun sounds be very normal and grounded was intentional, and I think the narrower window of possibilities Realism provided them made them put a ton of effort into really making sure each gun sounds good, and I think it shows because they feel incredible to shoot. The weapons that use the volt cell for ammo are the only ones that sound a bit stylized, and I'd argue that for a railgun from 800 years in the future, it's still pretty grounded.
GG.
The handling and reloading of weapons is very interesting though. It's very different from the boxy sound of most military shooters like Call of Duty, or from the raw and realistic sound of a game like Tarkov. It has an almost sweet characteristic to it, with soft and rounded edges on the transients. This helps the guns feel very futuristic when you're using them, without needing the actual gunshots to provide that impression. They sound this way because they aren't made out of metals, they're made out of whatever material 3D printers in the marathon world use. I don't know much about 3D printing, and especially not 3D printing 800 years in the future, so I'm not going to LARP like I know what I'm talking about here with polymers or filaments or plastics or whatever, but the guns being made out of those materials is how those futuristic handling sounds are actually grounded in realism, despite not being what we recognize as gun handling sounds. So yeah, with all the guns, I'm really impressed that they kept the actual gunshot sounds grounded and modern, but still managed to have them feel like they fit into the futuristic setting of the game. They could have gone crazy with them like they did in Destiny, and the intentional choice not to created limitations that they got creative within. And then yeah, I think also that it being realistic for the handling of them to sound high-tech due to them being created using advanced 3D printing techniques and materials was a really clever, or maybe convenient, way to have them still feel futuristic without the gunshots themselves needing to provide that impression. Very cool stuff. Also, different gun attachments can actually change the way that the gun handling sounds without actually changing how the gunshot sounds. Of course, if you put like a suppressor on, it's going to sound different, but even just having a different scope on can change how the ADSing sounds. I'm not willing to do a giant deep dive into this without a shooting range, so please Bungie, give me a shooting range. Please, please, please. I will do a follow-up video on gun sounds, very in-depth, if you give me a shooting range. Please, please, please. UESC dropships make a big disperse sound when they're about to come drop reinforcements. They sound really cool, but what I find interesting about them is how their sound is grounded in realism. The artists who designed the dropships in Marathon appear to have given them some type of advanced ion propulsion instead of jet engines or rockets. I'm going to spare you from the long-winded section I originally had in this video about ion propulsion, so just pause the video if you want to read about it. Ion propulsion is silent, and the sound team kept the sound grounded by respecting that. The dropships make a bunch of other sounds, which I assume is just whatever mechanical systems and engines are required for the rest of the ship to function. They do sound super cool, and I think they're another great example of how the sound team showed restraint and helped ground the game in realism by not having them make some crazy sound like many pieces of especially older sci-fi media do. Damn, those do sound pretty cool though. I guess it does rob them of the ability to make some iconic sound, but you know, I don't think everything needs to sound iconic. It can just actually serve a greater purpose within the media that it's in. As most of you probably already know, a runner is a digital consciousness that gets placed inside of a cybernetic body, which is called a shell. The audio team specifically designed many of the audio cues and UI sounds with the idea that they are being produced by the shell itself, or by our consciousness within it, and they called that the neural net. This provides a physically realistic origin for all of the sounds, for the user interfaces, notifications, handler communications, crew voice chat, etc.
Which one is it again? That thing.
You want that?
No, I don't want that.
Anomalous interference detected. Ignore any visions of an unfamiliar past.
They're not meant to be like the tactile and raw sounds you find in Tarkov or Arc Raiders, because they're originating from the neural net. These are sounds that presumably Sakaguchi or CyberAcme created, and they definitely sound like it. They aren't overly mechanical or digital, and they feel very clean and tonal and almost organic, which makes sense since they are made for our cybernetic shell, which is a hybrid of organic and mechanical and digital. What I find especially interesting though is that when the shell is operating properly, we get to hear those nice cute and clean and healthy user interface sounds. But as the shell is damaged or put into the down but not out state, what we hear becomes distorted and glitchy. And as we bleed out, the sounds we hear are at first more similar to the regular healthy UI sounds, sort of like a cybernetic heartbeat. As we get closer to death, those sounds start to fall apart, and that heartbeat becomes erratic. Then, as we near death and the connection is about to be lost, we hear sounds that are actually very heavily processed human voices. And then, I think the sound that plays when the shell is fully disconnected is really the cherry on top of all the neural net sounds, because it feels really dark and digital, and perfectly communicates that the runner's consciousness is disappearing back into the digital void that it's kept in when it's not inhabiting a shell.
I'm trying to fucking quest, like, holy shit, dude.
Good job. You're so good, bro.
Come on, bro. What, you think I'm cute or something?
We normally assume that user interface sounds or notifications or audio feedback or death sounds are non-diegetic. Marathon went way above and beyond to maintain a grounded and realistic experience by making all of those sounds diegetic through the neural net and through our cybernetic bodies, just as they made the main menu represent the void that we exist in between shells and the loading screens be the consciousness transfer. It's pretty damn cool. Also, fun, slightly related fact, the bags runners leave behind when they die will hum if somebody in their crew is still alive. Shout out to SeraphMax on YouTube for testing this. Alright, I just wanted to quickly add, apparently the developers said that there was this mechanic in the game called digital psychosis, but in testing, I couldn't actually find this in game. Like, I thought I heard it in Dire Marsh, like in the AI uplink basement. But that's pretty much the only place I could find it. I tried to go underground everywhere else, and I wasn't really hearing these kind of hallucinations that they were talking about. But it makes sense from a lore perspective, you know, because the process of putting the runner's mind into a shell isn't perfect, and I think it would be a really cool mechanic, you know? Maybe you throw a grenade and it curses a runner for a really long time, or some sort of mechanic to have that kind of haunting psychosis carry from run to run, like maybe if you fail too many times in a row. I don't know. There's a lot of cool stuff they can do with it, and I really hope they do in the future.
Hey, buddy, you friendly?
Only because you asked.
Okay. I'm just trying to go home.
I'm not, but I'm not that guy, you know.
Okay.
The Rook is not a real Sakaguchi-made biomatter runner shell like all of the others. He's a fully mechanical UESC frame that was only used for generic manual labor, which is why when you take control of one, they're just off doing something random and not grouped with the combat UESC units or anything like that. When a runner inhabits a Rook, it's more like they're hacking into it as opposed to the real integration process of regular shells, which also means they endure less mental degradation. Real Sec-Gen runner shells literally speak since they are advanced and high-tech, and I guess have synthetic vocal cords and everything. The Rook sounds crude and mechanical and robotic because he was mass-produced in what seems like the cheapest way possible considering the technology available, and the way that the sound team designed his voice really emphasizes that.
Activating combat frame. Connection established. Rook online. Rook frame online. Rook online. Ready to deploy. Rook.
The actual sound of his voice sounds like it was made with components that are so cheap in the Marathon universe that they even exist for us today. Then, they also grounded his voice in his manual laborer lore by only letting him speak in basic work-related phrases. Most of what he says sounds like it's being pieced together from a small library of pre-recorded voice lines, and he clearly struggles with some phrases that his frame likely wasn't meant to say, but that the runner is piecing together for him.
Leave me. Let us fight. I bring death. You are target. Time to die.
As for the rest of the UESC, I can't actually find any concrete information from any source about the sounds that they make. There's quite a bit of lore about the UESC, which I won't spoil since it's something that you learn about in a really great questline in-game, but none of it reveals anything about the sounds they make specifically. I do have my theories, but let me know in the comments if any of you have any ideas for why the UESC sound the way they do.
The invisible cunt.
Why do I have to be the invisible cunt?
Because you just are, man. Get over it.
If you've been paying attention, you'll notice that almost every clip in this video is of me killing assassin players in solos. This is not by choice. Killing assassin players in solos is my cross to bear, and I'm really good at it.
You wanted to kill?
Ain't no way, boy. Ain't no way.
Because of that though, I want to talk about the ability I've heard the most, which is the assassin's stealth. The assassin can go stealth using any of his 3 abilities, or when he enters into a cloud of smoke created by a smoke grenade. If he takes damage or uses a consumable, he's briefly revealed. Thief can use her visor to see him easily, which is a lot of fun in solos.
What the fuck is this food, my friend?
Completely unrelated to the video, but I always find it so funny to run into Quebecers in Marathon. Really makes the game feel more realistic to me as a resident of Ottawa. Anyways, the sound of the assassin's stealth is really cool. It has sounds for activation and deactivation, and a looping sound which plays during it. The looping sound gets louder the more the assassin moves, and if they stay still, it's almost completely silent.
Stealth engaged.
The actual in-universe explanation for how the shell goes invisible sent me on a wild goose chase that genuinely delayed this video because I didn't want to get it wrong. I ended up thinking that it was a repurposed tech from the ancient Jaro, I'm hoping that's how I pronounce it, civilization. I knew that they could mess with space-time, and I thought that that meant that the shell was potentially going in and out of phase with reality to cloak itself. Then I found a section in the Marathon Strategy Guide from 1994 that described BioBus chip enhancements which, in the previous games, could allow the player to become transparent. That sounded like it made sense, and I was pretty satisfied with that answer, but I asked the Marathon Reddit just in case, and somebody responded with the obvious answer. He has chromatophores, like a squid. It's on one of his character select lines.
Chromatophores primed.
Chromatophores are cells that allow some animals, like squid and octopuses, to change their visual appearance to camouflage themselves. And if his chromatophores have a harder time keeping him in stealth as he moves faster or takes damage, that also needed to be reflected in the sound, which it is. If the shell presumably has millions of chromatophores, it makes sense that the sound of the assassin's stealth sounds like it's actually many small sounds. That's a tongue twister. We can also find similar sounds being used for the invisibility in Crisis and Ghost in the Shell. It's hard to say whether it's by coincidence or not, but many other movies or shows or whatever that have invisibility also sound pretty similar.
Chicken chips.
Oh, Jesus.
Obviously, nothing like the assassin's stealth exists in real life, and the phenomena that does, like the cephalopod's chromatophores, don't make any audible sound. This means that the sound of the assassin's stealth grounded itself in both the Sekaguchi-made biomimetic technology that it's based off of in-universe and in our own memories of what invisibility or cloaking sounds like from older movies and games. It's genuinely crazy. I really wish that I had time to dive into every sound in the game this way, because I don't doubt that many of them are just as interesting. Next, we're going to first take a look at some of the game mechanics that rely on audio, then we're going to talk about the technical implementation of all the sounds, because that's what actually allows all of these physically grounded sounds to behave in the way that we'd expect them to in the game world. Extraction shooters often feature an audio mechanic that the sound team from Marathon calls dinner bells. These are sounds that are heard map-wide and reveal to every player in the lobby that another player has taken a specific action.
There's gonna spawn a couple of ghosts, like, on our left and right. Could leave them off.
Dinner bells are a great game design tool that makes the player who rung the bell consider the risk or reward of doing so. They also enable other players who hear it to express volition by choosing what to do with that information, allowing different playstyles to be viable with more consistency. Rats get to avoid the situation, and Chads get to run towards it. Dinner bells in other extraction shooters are usually pretty easy to understand, because they're sounds that most players are familiar with in real life. Marathon obviously doesn't have that luxury, since so much of the game involves things that don't exist in our world. Yet, to get good at Marathon, players have to learn the unique audio language of the game, and that includes so many small sounds that aren't necessarily map-wide announcements, but are still valuable sources of tactical information that experienced players will use to inform their decisions in real time.
I heard them when they were here. This is where I heard them. That's them. I heard it. They didn't open the door though. What? Wait, might be this vent right here.
Maybe this?
Yep, right here. Gotta heal.
Killed one. Knocked two. Knocked all three. Retreated. Who's that guy? I'm the best player in the game, bro.
These more local sounds are mostly controlled and balanced by what we call fall-off distances, which are the curves that define how a sound gets quieter as it gets further away from the player. First season Marathon players will remember when the devs increased the fall-off distance of gunshots briefly, turning every map into a battle royale. They rolled it back pretty quick, but it was a great example of how much audio implementation can impact the gameplay. Alright, so footsteps in Marathon are a little weird. You'll probably be surprised to learn that every shell actually plays the same footstep sounds, but that each shell has their own unique Foley sounds that play over top of those footstep sounds. I had to rewrite this section in the middle of making this video because in the hundreds of clips that I farmed for this video, I couldn't find a single one that actually showcased this. I normally play very aggressive, so in some left ear, right ear, crab walking rat situation, I'm sure you can hear them, but I don't find myself in those situations, so I don't have any examples of them being easy to hear, so I'm having to redo this section. Okay, I'm actually having to redo parts of this section again, because I think I just hadn't actually studied the difference between them. I'm going to show you this comparison between all the runner footsteps, and it was only after editing that together and hearing the examples so many times that now when I went back to go get footage for the rest of the video that I was missing, I was able to hear runner footsteps much better than I could before doing this section. The point I'm about to make is still valid, I think, but I just needed to interject and correct myself in that now after I've actually studied the audio and heard the comparison that I'm about to show you so many times, I am actually better at identifying them. and it is possible, and it was a skill issue. Anyways, this just makes me think that these Foley sounds are primarily meant to be just aesthetically pleasing for the player's experience of their own shell, as opposed to tactical information for players to make decisions based off of. And like, yeah, I could be wrong, and it might just be due to how aggressive I play, but I don't think in my 350 hours of playtime with my expensive studio monitor headphones that I've ever heard which shell is near me without having heard them use an ability or a shell-specific movement tech or something, and then use that information to inform a tactical decision. So yeah, I think they're just there to benefit the player's experience of playing their own shell. If the intention is for them to provide tactical information, they need to come through much more. Anyway, here's a bunch of footstep sounds. So like, you can definitely hear the differences between all the runners, but at least for me, it's not information that I find myself able to actually gather reliably enough in-game to make tactical decisions based off of. What I think Marathon did an outstanding job with is their spatial audio. Sound behaves in a way that feels physically accurate. Many players will take these audio phenomena for granted because we're used to sound working that way in real life, but in game development, nothing exists without somebody intentionally creating it, and this type of physically based spatial audio experience is no exception to that. The primary tool for achieving this is through the use of Wise's spatial audio features called rooms and portals, which we'll go through respectively. The audio team manually marked up every room in every map in the game, which is a big reason that the sound in them feels so realistic. They didn't just slap a convolution reverb on an entire building and call it a day. They spent the time to do it manually, so that even within a room, sound will behave differently depending on where it is in the room. An acoustic portal handles how sound travels from one of those rooms to another one. Sometimes this is simple, like a giant opening in a building, which allows sound to pass through it mostly intact. Other times, though, this can be a sound deep in an underground tunnel, in which case the sound will be diffused and more difficult to gather information about, like distance and direction. From a gameplay perspective, I don't think it's a coincidence that this means that as maps progress in difficulty, from perimeter to dire marsh to outpost to cryo, that the sounds players hear also suffer more from this realistic spatial audio processing, making them more difficult to parse and requiring players to learn what sounds like what, where, and when. Anybody who's played Cryo Archive, especially the first few times, knows just how much harder it is to really hear what's going on there versus a map like Perimeter. I don't think they said, hey, we're gonna make Cryo Archive the way it is to lean into the increased difficulty our spatial audio solution can provide there, but I do think it was a beautiful and useful coincidence. I started collecting footage for this video and reading about Marathon before it even released during the server slam, because I had basically just finished up this contract with an amazing studio called Double Fine. Miss you guys, love you guys. And I basically found myself with a ridiculous amount of free time on my hands. So it was a rare experience where I had been greatly anticipating a game and it was about to release and I had a bunch of free time on my hands, and it's probably one of the only times that I've actually been that excited for a game, have it come out, and actually not only meet those expectations, but really exceed them. It's like everything in the game was designed to be as cool as possible for me specifically. Everything from like the serif fonts to like the industrial design of the little objects and the way that the gun sounds. It's like they went inside my brain and just like developed and designed this experience for me specifically. So I had a very good time with the game. And like I said, I'm not even really into extraction shooters. Like I've played Hunt and Tarkov and Ark and whatever you consider an extraction shooter, but I had to really kind of roll. I was determined to enjoy this game no matter what the genre was. So I really had to kind of roll up my sleeves and get as sweaty as I possibly could. I grinded ranked. I did all the hardest contracts. I reached VIP with everybody except for Sakaguchi because that's insane. I lost everything at the Lose Everything factory. I got the ranked reward for hitting gold for getting the Destroyer skin. I got the Profiteer title for having $1 bazillion. Like, I did everything that I could possibly do in the game to not have gear fear and experience it to its fullest. It was an experience that I really wanted to have, and I had it. And it was basically perfect and exactly what I would have hoped for. And it also kind of happened to me at a point in my life where I had just finished up this really cool contract with this company that I'm like in love with. So it was this, you know, kind of this peak moment in my life leading up to a game that I'd been anticipating for so long. So it was just the perfect storm for me to really immerse myself in it and have such a good time with it. And so it's obvious to me and anybody who actually put in a bunch of hours into the game that there is an incredible foundation here. Even if everybody's going to have their own opinions about it, people have opinions about things that they actually care about. You know, if people don't like a game, sure, some people might just try to farm rage slop content online, but a lot of people are just going to move on to what they actually do enjoy, you know? I think it's poetic that the first season was called Death is the First Step, because maybe that's what has to kind of happen with the game. You know, maybe it has to fail a little bit before it becomes what it can be. I don't know. Thanks for watching my video. I hope it turned out well. It's been a little while since I made one, and it's going to be a while until I make another one, at least doing this game study stuff. I'll probably do some other kind of more boring, nerdy audio technical stuff because I'm learning some new things. And anyways, yeah. Love you all. Stay safe. Drink water. Hydrate. Get good sleep. Exercise. Okay, bye.